Hello, I'm Marsha Bonhart, and welcome to the Dayton Commission Candidates Forum brought to you by the Dayton Weekly News. This is Dayton's longest running African-American news publication. And we've invited all of the candidates to join us on Zoom to respond to a series of questions and issues that are on the minds of Dayton voters. Welcome. Hello, and we welcome Jared Grandy, who is joining us as a commission candidate. Hello, Mr. Grandy, how are you?
Good, how are you, Ms. Bonhart?
Doing great. Thanks so much for joining us today. I wanted to start by talking with you about your resignation from your position as the city's Community Police Relations Coordinator. Your platform has been creating better police community relations. If you were not able to make a difference in your position, your former position, how do you think you'll be able to do that with police relations as a commissioner?
That's an excellent question. And it's more than fair. We have to reimagine public safety. That's why I continually say that on my platform. I constantly say that in these forums. We have to reimagine public safety because creating good relationships between the community and the police as the police currently exist is more than difficult. It's almost impossible because it's structured in a way that's not designed to be in community with the people that they serve. I believe that we need less armed members of our law enforcement agencies. We need people there to help resolve conflict. We need more community advocates as our first line of defense to create safer communities. I understand that I like to tell people that if I'm elected commissioner, the Dayton Police Department is not going to look different overnight. I'm under no illusion that I can snap my fingers or wave a magic wand and create a whole new, different public safety infrastructure. So in the meantime, we need to put our foot on the gas with regard to some of the reforms that the community has already been working on with regard to de-escalation training and cultural competency. However, if we're going to create good relationships, what I would have the power to do as a commissioner is to get rid of some of the policies that continually deteriorate that relationships, such as no-knock warrants and pretextual traffic stops, which the Dayton Police Department continually engages in. But over the bigger picture is we need more community advocates, people who teach young people how to resolve conflict, people who help neighborhoods build capacity to police themselves, and help Daytonians be in community with each other.
That sounds like the job that you had as the police relations coordinator. So it sounds like you're going to bring that job to your job if you were to win the position of commissioner.
Yes, ma'am. I loved my job. I loved the idea of what the job was. However, my position, like many other positions at the Dayton Human Relations Council, wasn't properly supported, propped up, and funded. So we had a lot of vibrant conversations in these boardrooms and these community meetings, but they got stuck right there. They never made it to the level of commission. So essentially, I am running to be the commissioner that I wish that I had. One that was super engaged in the process, one that was there listening to the residents, and one that would bring those conversations to the boardroom where they actually make decisions and set policy and make sure that that policy becomes implemented. So as a community police relations coordinator, I was a facilitator. And as time went on, I understood that the community needed more than a mere facilitator and an advocate, and I became that. And that did cause some friction between myself and my leadership. However, I was always taught to do what was right, and I continued to do so. But in this particular case, as a commissioner, what I hope to have the opportunity to do is actually implement the policy that people have been advocating for years. As community police relations coordinator, I could only suggest that you implement this policy. As a commissioner, I would get the chance to actually implement the policy that people have been advocating for a very long time.
Thank you for that response. So you've been quoted as saying that you are unapologetically progressive. Can you give me that in detail? Progressive.
Yes, ma'am. I think we need to be aggressive about a lot of the things that people care about, such as protecting our environment, doing our part as Daytonians to protect our climate. We also need, in that, we need to make sure that we build a vibrant green infrastructure. We need to move into the future. We need to invest in solar energy and other renewable sources of energy. I think people consider it progressive to reimagine public safety. Again, figuring out a way to create safer communities without the over-policing of Black and brown people. Responsible redevelopment. I'm not against tax abatements necessarily, but I do think they need to be used responsibly. That is an incentive that we need to give to people who will actually come in and benefit the community, and not just give it away freely because we think that we are a better city because a big developer came in and did some work. Regular people pay taxes, so should developers. As a matter of fact, maybe we should set aside more abatements for neighbors who want to invest in their block, in their own neighborhood, in their community. The other progressive policies that I stand on is support for our immigrant community, support for our LGBTQ plus community. And when I say support, that means funding the institution that is designed to support those communities, marginalized communities, and that's the Dayton Human Relations Council. That agency was founded by a group of activists and community leaders, and it was designed to address systemic issues with regards to race and other issues. And in order for that agency to operate properly, it has to be properly funded, and more than that, it has to be supported by the commissioners who oversee the work that that agency does.
So with your you being unapologetically progressive, how can you relate, or can you relate to city residents who are quite not there yet and are unapologetically conservative?
Yes, ma'am. At the end of the day, I think people want to see issues resolved. Protecting the climate, being an advocate for environmental justice means that we want to clean up the neighborhoods. We want to get those unofficial dump sites that are in the middle of so many Dayton residential neighborhoods cleaned up. It's bad for the environment, but it's also bad for the people. It's bad for morale. It's bad for property values. These issues align, right? Everybody wants to protect their investment, especially homeowners. And so if you have an unofficial dump site in the middle of your neighborhood, your investment is not being protected. Matter of fact, your investment is being deteriorated. So I think these issues that that I stand on as a progressive actually align with people's interest, regardless of their political persuasion, regardless of the color of their skin, their age, or anything else.
Well, certainly some of those issues, absolutely. But in terms of how you feel about policing and racial disparity and that kind of thing, there may be some folks who are voters who may not agree with that heavy of a progression, and tend to be a little bit more on the conservative side. So my question is, how would you relate to those who would agree with you on some issues, but on some of the others would not?
Yeah, that's a good question.
They're voters too, and they're residents as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially when we're talking about the issue of policing. So I live in a neighborhood that has $200,000, $300,000 houses in some areas of my neighborhood. And I would understand why they wouldn't want some of the crime and incivility that occurs just blocks away to make its way into the cul-de-sac in which they invested heavily in. But what I hope to have a conversation with people about for a very long time is that the over-policing of people isn't the only way to protect your investment. If we invest in these young people, if we invest in our youth and rec services, if we invest in community advocates, if we invest in programs that teach conflict resolution, if we invest in jobs programs and apprenticeships, then we eliminate those problems. They will never make their way to your neighborhood because we have addressed it in the front end. Frederick Douglass said it's easier to build up a child than it is to repair a broken man. And that's my philosophy. I think we need to invest in our community, invest in our young people, invest in our neighborhoods, invest in people, period. And then we will start to see a reduction over time in crime and incivility. Again, I want to make it clear to folks that if I'm elected commissioner, again, the Dayton Police Department is not going to look different overnight. I don't have that power. Nobody does. It's an institution that has been in place for centuries at this point. However, again, if we invest, then those dividends will be paid out in a long run for a very long time.
Thank you, Mr. Grandy, very much.
Yep.
Responding to national events regarding community police relations. And we're going to talk about this because this is certainly is your area. City undergoing a 9-month police reform process, members of the community included in that, of course. Do you think this will adequately address the issues of race relations and policing?
No, it's a step in the right direction, but it's far from a panacea. And I often said this as the community police relations coordinator in these boardrooms to the Dayton Police Department command staff, is that we need to see a cultural shift within the department. When we talk about race relations, we have to understand that the Dayton Police Department, police departments all over this country operate in a certain way, and there's a culture that's continually propped up, and that is not reflective of the culture of the communities that they patrol. So in order for us to make significant progress with regard to community police relations and by extension, race relations, we need a police department that is reflective of the values of that community. As it exists right now, not only in Dayton, Ohio, but in Chicago, Illinois, and Gary, Indiana, and Toledo, Ohio, and Louisville, Kentucky, and Orlando, Florida, what you have is police officers who come into urban cores, into urban neighborhoods from surrounding suburban or rural areas. They come in, they police the community using tactics that are sometimes dangerous. They collect a salary and then they take that money back into their community where they own a home, where they have invested in property and other things. And they pay taxes and their children get to benefit from those tax dollars, and their economies get to thrive on the backs of the people they're policing in these urban communities. That whole dynamic needs to change. It's not equitable, it's not fair, and it doesn't benefit the communities, the urban cores that they police. So as long as we have that dynamic, you're always going to have this tension. And it's not on its face inherently racial, but the dynamics of the current demographic makeup of this dynamic, there's clearly a racial component to it. And we have to do a lot more work to address that and to shift the culture and increase diversity in our public safety institutions.
Could we go back over that? Something that you said that I'd like you to talk more about. You said it is inherently not racial.
Yes, meaning that it doesn't. The dynamic that I was speaking of with regard to people coming outside of the community to police or patrol a community that they don't belong to, meaning they don't live there, that could happen whether not the officers, regardless of whether the officers Black, white, Latino, whatever. However, because of the dynamics in our country, because of systemic inequities, because of historical practices, they almost always tend to be white, especially in the Dayton Police Department. We only hover around somewhere between, in a good year, we're around 10% diversity, and that's including women. So, it doesn't have to be, when I say it's not inherently racial, meaning that it doesn't necessarily have to, doesn't have to be about the color of a person's skin. But in this particular case, again, these officers are almost always white, not only white, but white males. So that brings the racial component into the conversation, and it has to be addressed.
Let's talk about Governor Mike DeWine and his initiative addressing minority health and racial disparities. Mayor Whaley and the commissioners praised his declaration that racism is indeed a public health crisis and have declared racism as a public health emergency. So what are your thoughts on that declaration, and how will you address that as a commissioner?
I appreciate these declarations. I really do. I appreciate the acknowledgement of these historical inequities. I appreciate the acknowledgement of systemic racism, but acknowledging it doesn't necessarily do anything to address it. You have to take the next step. So our Dayton City Commission has acknowledged public health as systemic racism as a public health crisis, but then turned around and defunded the only institution that the city has that is designed, the only agency within the city of Dayton structure that is designed to address the issues of systemic racism, and that is the City of Dayton Human Relations Council. So while we make these declarations, we defund the institution that is designed to deal with the problem that you just acknowledged the problem, and then you continue to increase the budget of the Dayton Police Department, which I think most of us can agree on contributes to this racial tension and contributes to the systemic inequity and inequality. So again, I'm happy that we make these declarations and have these acknowledgements. But if we don't do the work to support what we just said, then it's mere lip service, and people don't have time for that. People are suffering. People need the actual support that should come with these declarations. And on a state level, with regard to these declarations, during the pandemic, this Mike DeWine and others recognize that there has to be loans, there has to be help given, especially to small businesses. However, if you talk to a lot of small business owners in the minority community, they didn't get a chance to get access to those same level of services. They didn't get the same amount of loans as some of their white counterparts did.
And how would you address that as a commissioner? Well, let's say you were on the commission when all this is going on. What would you have done, and what would you do to correct all these things?
As a City of Dayton commissioner, what I would have done was supported the agency that is designed to address these issues. So with regard to, let's stay on the issue of minority, the support of minority owned and local owned businesses. We have an agency that has a few programs that are designed to build the capacity of minority owned businesses and small and local businesses, and help them eventually procure contracts with the city of Dayton in order to build their capacity further to do more work across the state. However, we, as a commission, the city commission won't approve or didn't approve the funding for an administrator to run that program. The city has left jobs within that program vacant so that that program can't operate to its fullest capacity. Again, if we're going to make these declarations, if we're going to say that we're going to address these historic inequities, we have to do the work. We have to put our money where our mouth is, fund these programs, and make sure that they're operating properly. Last thing I'll say, Ms. Bonhart, with regard to this particular issue and how the commission relates to it, I worked at the HRC for 3.5 years. And while I didn't work in that particular department, I was good friends with everyone who did. And I also often brainstorm and think through these issues. I cannot say honestly that I've seen a commissioner come through often to help us think through these issues, to help us and support us in our efforts to support minority-owned businesses. Again, I'm running to be a commissioner that I wish I would have saw while I was at the HRC, a commissioner who supports that organization and a commissioner who is willing to do the work, actual work, not just make declarations, but actually do the work to prop up and address these systemic issues.
Thank you, Mr. Grandy. Well, Dayton, of course, is ready to receive the funding from the latest COVID-19 stimulus bill, $147 million. As a commissioner, where would you like to see this money directed if you were in office?
Yes, ma'am. The first thing we have to do is balance our budget. There is a looming deficit that has occurred as a result of the pandemic. So we have to address that deficit. It's not clear what that deficit is. There's an estimate that it's around $18 million. So the first thing we need to do is balance our budget. But after we balance our budget, I think that we need to use that money to, one, get more aggressive about fixing our infrastructure, fixing our roads. I talked to a lot of voters, and what every voter can agree on is that they're spending too much money repairing their suspensions of their car, buying tire rods, repairing flat tires from driving on damaged roads. We were declared one of the poorest cities in the entire United States of America. So we're asking an already struggling population to spend more money repairing their vehicles, money that they do not have. So we have to address that problem. We have to repair our infrastructure and repair our roads. That's a basic service that local municipalities should that they should address. But further than that, what I want to do is take this opportunity to provide jobs, especially for young people, and support our young people and invest our young people. We had a lot of conversation, or we have a lot of conversation about this idea of bringing back priority boards. And priority boards had their pitfalls. They had their problems. One of those problems was that the community was not engaging as heavily as the city would have liked. It didn't seem worth the investment. But what I know is there are a lot of young professionals, a lot of young people who would be willing to canvass their neighborhoods, organize in their neighborhoods, bring some energy to their neighborhoods, and bring people to the table. It's not enough to say we are having a neighborhood association meeting. It's not enough to say that this priority board exists here. We have to have people out in the community knocking on doors, engaging residents, figuring out those issues and inviting them to the table. We ran an initiative in Residence Park when I was still at the HRC, and we saw exactly that. We stood out in front of Estrich markets. We knocked doors. We went to pantries. We invited people to neighborhood association meetings and other meetings, and lo and behold, people came. We decreased the median age of a neighborhood association meeting by at least 30 years just by bringing in some 19, 20, 21-year-olds to the table, so they can have use their voice and have a say about what's going on in their neighborhood.
Mr. Grandy, thank you so much for your conversation today. And good luck in your race as commissioner.
Thank you.